So, if you are deep in study mode right now for your professional planning exam, you already know the grind.
Oh, absolutely. It is a lot.
You're probably staring down a mountain of dense frameworks, theoretical definitions, endless case studies. I mean, it can feel like you're just trying to memorize a massive textbook.
Yeah, which is exhausting.
Exactly. But you can take a breath because today's deep dive is really designed to be your ultimate audio study guide. We are taking one specific, highly crucial piece of your source material and breaking it down so thoroughly that the concepts are just going to become second nature to you.
That is the mission for today. We're looking at a truly foundational text in modern urban design. It's an article called Through an Equity Lens, Planning for Healthy and Equitable Communities by Victoria Barr. And this was published in the fall 2019 issue of Planning West. Our goal here is to synthesize the exact concepts, definitions, and real-world precedents that are laid out in this article. So by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand the material inside and out, not just as bullet points to memorize, but as fundamental shifts in the planning profession that you could intuitively grasp and apply on your exam.
So keep your hands on the wheel or your eyes on your walk and let us do the heavy lifting. Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand Barr's article, we have to look at the context of the last decade. Because over the past 10 years or so, there's been this massive shift in the profession toward planning for what we call healthy communities.
Yes.
It used to be that if a planner provided, open space, some decent housing, and safe streets, the job was basically done. But this article argues that focusing purely on physical spaces is missing a massive piece of the puzzle.
It really is. Barr makes a compelling case that community health goes far beyond just poverty or the built environment. She points out that major health indicators, things like a population's overall life expectancy or chronic disease rates, like obesity, are actually inextricably linked to underlying social inequities.
Right, the root causes.
Exactly. And she traces the roots of these modern inequities directly back to historical factors. We're talking colonialism, racism, discrimination, and really deep-seated imbalances of power. The framework she presents suggests that you simply cannot adequately plan a healthy physical community without addressing the historical and systemic factors that created the current health disparities in the first place.
And there is a crucial, almost counterintuitive takeaway in this introduction that feels, so fundamental to the field right now. As a listener, you might assume that social inequity only harms those at the bottom of the economic ladder.
Right, that's the common assumption.
But the author argues that high levels of inequity actually negatively affect everyone in a community, even those with the highest incomes. That seems like a paradox at first glance. How does the author justify that claim?
Well, it really comes down to the social fabric of the city itself. The reasoning provided in the text is that greater social inequity actually reduces social connections across the entire community. When you have stark divides between the haves and the have-nots, those communal connections fray.
Makes sense.
And that fraying contributes to an overarching environment of stress, fear, and insecurity that permeates the entire city. And that happens regardless of your personal tax bracket. Therefore, the premise is that building healthier communities isn't a zero-sum game. Planners have to ensure their work provides everyone with access to essential elements, like affordable transportation and safe neighborhoods, because a secure community benefits everyone.
So to combat these complex issues, planners in Canadian cities have started using what is called an equity lens, which is really the core framework of the entire article. An equity lens is essentially a rigorous set of guiding questions that city staff and elected officials must continually ask themselves during the decision-making process.
Right.
And the text outlines a few specific questions that are vital to internalize for your exam. They ask things like, who will actually benefit from a new policy or service? Who might be excluded from those benefits, and critically why? And who might actively be harmed by this new initiative?
Those questions demand a level of foresight that traditional planning honestly sometimes skipped. And the questions go even deeper. They ask, how might some population groups be unfairly burdened today or even generations in the future? How might existing privilege be further entrenched by a seemingly neutral policy?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Have the important decisions been made with the direct and meaningful input of the people who will be most affected by them? And finally, from whose perspective is the success of the project actually being evaluated?
Here's where it gets really interesting. To help professionals understand how to apply those rigorous questions, the article relies on a very famous visual metaphor. If you've glanced at the PDF, you've seen the graphic at the bottom of the first page. For your professional practice, and definitely for the tests, you really need to be able to close your eyes and see this graphic,
Absolutely.
because it perfectly distinguishes three concepts that are so often mistakenly used interchangeably. And those are equality, equity, and justice.
Let's visualize that first image, which represents equality. The graphic shows three people of vastly different heights standing next to each other. They're all trying to watch a baseball game, but their view is completely blocked by a solid wooden fence. Now, under the concept of equality, all three individuals are given the exact same support. In this case, one wooden box to stand on.
The underlying assumption there is that everyone benefits equally from the exact same supports. It's equal treatment across the board. But when you look at the outcome in the visual, it is completely dysfunctional. Because they started at different heights, the tallest person is now elevated way higher than necessary.
Yeah.
The middle person can just barely peek over the fence. And the shortest person, even while standing on their one allotted box, still cannot see the game at all. Equal treatment did not produce a fair result.
Which perfectly sets up the second image in the graphic representing equity. In this panel, those same boxes have been redistributed. The shortest person is given 2 boxes.
Right.
The middle person gets 1, and the tallest person gets 0. The text defines this as ensuring everyone gets the specific supports they need. Barr explicitly notes that this is the concept of affirmative action. By providing different levels of support based on individual starting points and needs, the outcome is finally equitable. Now, all three people can comfortably see the game over that wooden fence.
That is such a powerful distinction. Equity manages the disparity. But then we get to the third image, which is the ultimate goal.
What's fascinating here is how the third image represents justice. In this final panel, nobody has any boxes to stand on at all. They don't need them. And the reason they don't need them is because that solid wooden fence has been entirely replaced by a see-through chain-link fence.
They didn't need to redistribute the boxes because they fixed the fence itself.
Exactly.
The text explicitly states that all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the root cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier was removed entirely. That is the fundamental difference you need to grasp for your exam. Equality gives everyone the same box. Equity gives people the boxes they need to overcome the barrier, but justice removes the barrier completely.
And moving into the second major section of the article, Barr addresses the natural follow-up question. We know what an equity lens is, and we know the difference between equity and justice, but why should a municipality actually mandate this approach? The author provides 3 major rationales for using an equity lens, which are highly testable. The first rationale she presents is economic strength.
That is an interesting pivot. Usually equity is framed purely as a moral imperative. How does the article link it to economic strength?
Well, the logic provided in the source is that equitable communities actually create more robust local economies. When you use an equity lens, you are actively removing barriers to entry. That gives a much wider demographic the opportunity to participate in the local economy at a higher level, whether that's through small business ownership, entering the workforce, or accessing education. When more people can fully participate, the entire economic system becomes more resilient. Furthermore, the article notes that the process of equity itself, which requires broad and inclusive community engagement, directly fosters the kind of innovation and stability needed for a thriving economy.
Okay, so the second rationale is comprehensive sustainability. Now, in traditional planning, when we hear the word sustainability, our minds immediately jump to green building codes, reducing carbon emissions, protecting wetlands. But the article insists that true sustainability cannot just be an environmental initiative.
It requires a much broader definition. Barr advocates for an integrated triple bottom line approach. In the corporate world, the triple bottom line usually means profit, people, and the planet. But in this specific planning context, the 3 E's are environment, economy, and equity.
Environment, economy, equity. Got it.
The assertion is that a city cannot be truly sustainable if it's only ecologically green, while its vulnerable populations are being displaced or marginalized. You must weigh equity equally alongside the environment and the economy to create a system that endures and serves all residents.
And the third rationale provided for using an equity lens is reconciliation.
Right. Barr posits that applying an equity lens aligns directly with authentic efforts toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. She argues that true reconciliation requires planners to stop ignoring the severe gaps in well-being between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations. It demands an acknowledgement of the ongoing legacies of colonialism and the ways in which systemic racism continues to operate within city planning.
It's forcing a mirror up to the profession.
Exactly. By utilizing an equity lens, the planning process forces a reckoning with these historical and current realities, which the author states will foster greater learning, healing, and connection, rather than just ignoring the gaps.
So we have the philosophical foundation, we understand the definitions, and we have the three rationales: economic strength, comprehensive sustainability, and reconciliation. But how do we actually do this? The article transitions into a practical toolkit titled, "How Can Planners Apply an Equity Lens?" It acknowledges that overhauling a city's entire approach can be incredibly daunting, so it advises planners to start small. Take one project, apply the lens, and grow from there. To do that, Barr outlined 6 specific steps.
Let's walk through these because this is the operational core of the job.
Step 1 is creating opportunities for participation. Planners have to design processes where people from all walks of life can genuinely participate in decision-making. But it goes way beyond just unlocking the doors to City Hall. You have to actively design these opportunities so that priority populations, those who are most vulnerable or historically marginalized, can fully engage.
And the author uses a fantastic term for this that you need to know: extreme outreach. We all know the stereotype of the classic public consultation, a town hall meeting held at 2:08 p.m. on a Tuesday in a basement conference room.
Oh, classic.
Right. The only people who can attend are those with immense flexibility and privilege. Extreme outreach means abandoning that model. It means going directly into the communities, meeting people where they are, and removing the barriers that prevent them from having a voice.
Which brings us to step 2, workplace diversity and inclusivity. This step turns the lens inward. You simply cannot effectively apply an equity lens to the public if your internal planning department operates within a monoculture. This requires explicit internal policies, strong leadership, and continuous training for every single staff member. The culture of the department itself has to reflect the diverse community it's trying to serve.
That external outreach is great, but step 3 is about the information you are actually gathering. The article stresses the need for diverse data sources, and it specifically points to health authorities as incredibly valuable partners for city planners. Why health authorities specifically?
Because health authorities often possess the granular day-to-day lived experience data that planners typically lack. Planners have zoning maps and traffic counts. Health authorities understand the localized rates of asthma, the mental health impacts of a lack of green space, or the realities of food deserts. By partnering with them, planners can gather a much more accurate picture of the true diversity and struggles within a community.
That's a huge shift in data collection. Step 4 is the careful examination of policies. When a new initiative is proposed, planners must intentionally examine the potential impacts regarding access and inclusion. You have to actively look for the blind spots. The text emphasizes looking specifically at how policies will affect groups that already experience racism, discrimination, or prejudice.
Step 5 focuses on effective communication. You have to ensure that anyone likely to be impacted by a project actually receives the information in a way they can understand. We have all seen those dense 500-page PDF reports buried on a broken municipal webpage.
I sure have.
That is a total failure of communication. The text specifies using clear, direct methods across a wide variety of channels, including video, graphics, and sound. If you only communicate in academic English through formal reports, you are unintentionally excluding huge swaths of the population.
And finally, step 6 is continual evaluation. You can't just launch a supposedly equitable policy, pat yourself on the back, and walk away. You have to continually evaluate the policy, the process used to develop it, and the equity framework itself. The article notes that this evaluation should utilize everything from hard statistics to personal narrative stories. The ultimate measure of success is whether stakeholders feel empowered, whether they can easily access resources, and whether they see themselves reflected in the community's future.
If we synthesize those 6 steps, Barr is essentially saying that committing to an equity lens requires courage. It requires the professional bravery to uncover uncomfortable power differences and acknowledge entrenched privilege. It means actively working to dismantle the systemic barriers that make it difficult for marginalized community members to participate in local decision-making.
So what does this all mean? That is a brilliant transition into the final section of the document. We have talked about the theory, but what does this look like in the real world? The sidebar of the article highlights 3 Canadian cities that have actually put these policies into practice: Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa. These are prime material for case study questions on an exam. Let's look at how they did it, starting with Toronto, Ontario.
Right, so Toronto developed a specific equity lens tool to help identify and remove barriers for marginalized populations. There are two operational mandates you should definitely be aware of here. First, Toronto requires equity impact statements. These statements are mandatory and must be attached to all major policies and reports before they go to the City Council.
Important detail.
Yes. Second, the city uses an equity-responsive budgeting process. This means that equity considerations, with the text specifically highlighting gender, are integrated directly into how the city allocutes its financial resources.
So Toronto uses equity impact statements and equity-responsive budgeting. Next is Hamilton, Ontario.
Hamilton's approach, at least at the time of publication, centered around a February 2019 City Council motion. They moved to develop a comprehensive action plan to implement an equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI lens. The goal was to weave this EDI lens into the fabric of absolutely everything the municipality does, from basic service delivery and program development all the way up to high-level business planning and prioritization.
And finally, we have Ottawa, Ontario. This is the most detailed case study in the text, and it focuses on public transit. Let's walk through this one carefully because it beautifully connects all the theories we have been discussing back to that visual metaphor of the baseball game.
In 2011, Ottawa's Transit Commission was reviewing bus routes and frequency, proposing various cuts and changes. But the community pushed back hard. Members brought concerns directly to the City Council regarding how these changes would devastate specific neighborhoods. They explicitly requested that the city undertake a study using an equity lens to see how the route changes would impact the most at-risk groups.
And the results of that community-demanded study were incredibly revealing. It proved that the proposed transit reductions disproportionately harmed highly vulnerable groups. The text lists the specific demographics. The cuts negatively impacted women, seniors, immigrants, people in poverty, youth, and people with disabilities. This is the perfect example of equality versus equity. Equal route cuts across a grid might seem fair on a spreadsheet that's giving everyone the same wooden box.
Exactly.
But the community demanded equity, recognizing that those vulnerable populations relied on those specific roads for their basic survival and participation in society. They needed a different level of support.
And because the study provided documented proof of that harm, the outcome was transformative. Ottawa didn't just fix the routes. The Transit Commission initiated a permanent policy to apply an equity and inclusion lens to all their operations going forward. Furthermore, they began working directly with community groups to ensure the lens is actually applied in practice, fundamentally changing how the agency operates.
This raises an important question, and it's exactly why this document is such a critical part of your study material. It moves planning from an abstract exercise in zoning to a profound responsibility for human well-being.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the true goal of these frameworks isn't just to help you pass a professional exam. The objective is to build urban environments that are genuinely responsive to local needs. It's about ensuring that the structural foundations of a city actively promote health and well-being for everyone, rather than quietly perpetuating historical imbalances of power. Knowledge is most valuable when it's actually understood and applied.
You have done incredibly well sticking with us through this material. We have taken a highly dense article and completely unpacked it. You now have a firm grasp of the equality, equity, and justice visual framework. You know the three rationales: economic strength, comprehensive sustainability, and reconciliation. You understand the 6 practical application steps, from extreme outreach to continual evaluation, and you are fully prepped on the real-world precedents set by Toronto, Hamilton, and Ottawa.
You're definitely ready for those questions.
Absolutely. But before you dive into your next study module, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time on that visual metaphor where justice is achieved by entirely replacing the solid wooden fence with a see-through chain link one. It sounds so simple in a drawing. But as you step into your career as a planner and start applying this equity lens, it makes you wonder. If achieving justice requires us to continually evaluate who holds power and to actively remove systemic barriers, how might the traditional bureaucratic hierarchy of the planning profession itself need to be dismantled or radically changed to truly build that chain link fence?
Something to think about.
Best of luck on your upcoming professional exam. You are going to do great. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into your material, and we will see you next time.